I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker today, who's going to speak on averting crisis, American strategy, military spending and collective defence in the Indo-Pacific. Ashley Townshend is the Director of Foreign Policy and Defence at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. He works on international security and strategic affairs, focusing on the Indo-Pacific, including regional alliances, maritime security defence policy and the US-Chinese-Australian strategy. He is the founding convener and co-chair of the US-Australia Indo-Pacific Deterrence Dialogue and is a frequent contributor to the Australian and international media. Ashley has held research and teaching positions in the Alliance 21 program at the United States Studies Centre, the International Security Program at the Lowry Institute, the Department of Government and International Relations at the University of Sydney, the Centre for Asia-Pacific Cooperation and Governance at Fudan University, the Warrior Scholar Project at Yale University and Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at the Australian National University, and also the Pacific Friends of the Global Fund. He completed his studies at the University of Oxford, Peking University, Sciences Po, Paris and the University of Sydney. So welcome home. I should point out that Ashley very kindly produced this very detailed booklet. There are copies available for you, and I'd ask you to collect that on your way out. So now I ask our guest speaker, Ashley Townshend, to address us on averting crisis, the American strategy and military spending and collective defence in the Indo-Pacific, and very useful as we discussed at the end of last year in a couple of presentations that in fact Australia is developing a new defence white paper. The 2016 defence white paper is probably well out of date. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and to the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you so much for hosting me here today to talk to you all about the report that we released last year, but also more broadly to talk about the issue of US-China strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific and what that means for Australia in an era of what we characterise as enduringly constrained American resources. Let me begin let me just come back to the report that we have on the back table there. The report that we put together at the US Study Centre over 18 months, published last year in August, provides a very detailed account of the inside-out explanation of American military strategy and American global strategy.
Faced with an increasingly contested regional security landscape and with limited defense resources at its disposal, the United States military is no longer assured of its ability to single-handedly uphold a favorable balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, said the report by the U.S. Studies Center's Ashley Townshend. China, by contrast, is growing ever more capable of challenging the regional order by force as a result of its large-scale investment in advanced military systems. The U.S. will remain influential. It still spends broadly as much on defense as the next 8 largest national defense budgets combined, but its military has been overstretched by 2 decades of counterinsurgency wars in the Middle East and faces continuing global commitments, aging equipment, and training. It's a machine gun! And while America wants to remain the dominant military power in the Indo-Pacific region, it faces growing deficits and rising public debt, as well as political resistance to continuing increases in military spending. The United States of America has been forced to prioritize the urgent over the important, Townshend said. China, by contrast, doesn't yet have global responsibilities. It has regional responsibilities. The United States has said Asia is their priority, but they don't behave like it is. A strategy of collective defense is fast becoming necessary as a way of offsetting shortfalls in America's regional military power and holding the line against rising Chinese strength. U.S.-China relations have deteriorated over the past year, ostensibly over trade, but the rhetoric over other points of tension. In particular, Chinese militarization in the South China Sea has grown increasingly belligerent in recent months. Under President Jinping, China's official defense budget has increased by about 75% to $178 billion, although the true figure is believed to be much larger. Beijing has invested in the development of high-precision ballistic missiles and countermeasures that would make it difficult for the U.S. military to quickly reach the disputed areas. Experts believe that the deployment of U.S. ground-based missiles and the changing role of the U.S. Marine Corps will be vital for countering China, as well as for collective regional defense, while Australia and Japan are doing more. In Australia, there is growing concern about inadequate protection. A separate report published on Sunday by the Australian Institute for Strategic Policy recommended that Australia build up and strengthen military capabilities in the sparsely populated north of the country. A military confrontation between China and the U.S. would not automatically trigger Australia's involvement under the ANZUS Treaty, but there would be significant political pressure on Australia to support the U.S. in any conflict. Ashley Townshend said it was vital for the U.S. to prioritize the Indo-Pacific region and for Australia to build a more networked collective defense. The U.S. military has already allocated about $210 million to strengthen the base of the Marine Corps near Darwin. During a recent visit to Australia, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper suggested that the U.S. wants to deploy medium-range missiles in Asia. The Australian government has noted so far that it has not received an official request for the deployment of these weapons. China, meanwhile, has found efficient ways to counter or exploit U.S. military weaknesses. Its decision to reform its Coast Guard as a military service last year raised sharp concern among Pentagon leaders, concerned about the unclear boundary between China's foreign military operations and other encounters, such as its annexation of islands and reefs in international waters, that Beijing could frame as a domestic dispute. China has also expanded its soft power influence in the region, investing heavily in small countries around the Pacific Rim, such as Micronesia and Vanuatu, that the U.S. and partner countries consider a pincer movement around territory Beijing wishes to control.